DeFi exchange Uniswap, real popular automated market maker over there on the Ethereum blockchain. They are complying with some OFAC sanctions and are blacklisting about 253 addresses that are known to be linked to sanctions violations, according to the US government. Now, this is interesting. There's been a whole lot of conversation around whether or not things on Ethereum can be censored as it relates to compliance issues brought up when OFAC sanctioned Tornado Cash, a very popular Ethereum mixing service. So I think if you go into the weeds here, you can see the rationale pretty clearly, right? This is a quote unquote, docs team, largely based in the US, and they don't want to go to jail. And people who are building these tools are even stating as much on sort of the chat logs that are being cited in this conversation. So we can toss this to the group. We'll see if anyone has strong feelings, and we'll start with Will. What do you got?
Yeah, this is not a very surprising story, right? The baristas in Brooklyn are a little bit nicer than the baristas in any sort of federal prison. So I don't see any of the developers of Uniswap Labs wanting to sacrifice their careers for this at all. Especially it's like a front end, right? Like just boot up a front end. It's $5,000, $10,000. Make a new front end, doesn't matter. Uniswap Labs is not going to sacrifice themselves over it. Smart contract still works. It's still out there. You can still swap whatever you want. There you go. Jen, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I think this is a great story that shows the difference between a centralized front end that's run by a company in New York that wants to abide by the laws because they don't want to go to jail, and a decentralized back end that allows anyone to interact with smart contracts. I think it's also important to show people, though, that crypto isn't this like be-all and end-all for criminals. It's not anonymous. There are a lot of companies out there, a lot of analytics firms that are working with centralized companies to identify people who are committing nefarious acts. And this is a great example of it. So if you are thinking about, doing something a little bit fishy using crypto, look at this story. There are a lot of companies out there that can find out who you are. And if not find out who you are, at least freeze those funds. So don't do it. Don't be a bad person. Wendy, what do you got?
I want to chime in and say, one of the reasons why I like crypto, it's very transparent. You can see when people are doing bad stuff. So and also too, one of the things that I wanted to bring up, I hate paying taxes. I think taxes are theft. I don't think anything positive about them. I don't think they actually go where they're supposed to go. But at the same time, I comply. I bend the knee and I pay my taxes because I'm not trying to get gaffled up or pay exorbitant fines. So I kind of understand why the people over at Uniswap are complying. They don't want to go to jail. Nobody wants to go to jail. I don't think jail would be a very, very fun thing. It's cold in there from what I've heard. But I can understand why they're doing it. However, I will say that because of these new laws, regulations, sanctions, whatever it may be, we're going to see a lot more projects come out and continue to be anonymous, which is actually not good for the crypto industry, because if somebody is anonymous, it makes the project a little bit more sketchy because you don't know who it is, do they have a positive track record, etc. So I don't think it's going to be a good thing for the crypto industry as a whole, but at the same time, I understand why they are doing this.
Yeah, and these update notes in GitHub are super interesting, right? Because this is the essence of the debate, distilled into an update log on a piece of software, right? This is user privacy and freedom versus compliance and potential overreach. And these are the big, weighty issues that developers in the space are weighing at all times. By all accounts, OFAC over-applied this action, right? They did this overly broad swath of users who potentially had access to who potentially touched at some level some of these addresses that seem to be linked to bad deeds, right? So they used a very blunt force instrument here, and now you have some engineers at Uniswap Labs saying, hey, I'm a doxed individual in the US, but I need to reckon with these big ideas, and we want to try to apply this as precisely as possible without us going to jail. And so you see what comes down to it. The proof is in the pudding. 253 addresses are blocked from the front end of Uniswap. The thing can still operate in the back end in 8 different ways, but Uniswap Labs, the known entity operating this front end, can no longer be said to be supporting these bad guys that have been identified by OFAC. And that's something, whether it's being broadcast to the world or is happening in Slack conversations, that's happening across the space as we speak, right? How do we do this in a way that complies with the letter of the law, avoids us going to jail, but also doesn't sacrifice the big ideals on which crypto is founded? And I think it's really interesting to see this conversation unfold on Twitter and on GitHub as teams reckon with it. But I'll toss it to Will for his final thoughts.
Yeah, last thought on this subject, and actually we'll continue it after the break with a little bit more about Alexei Prittsov and some demonstrations in the Netherlands over his arrest. As this conversation is happening on the base layer, right, with L1s, not just with applications. It's happening with like, what transaction do I include on my blockchain? Should validators or miners be able to block different transactions based on like the components in those transactions? Have they been touched in the past by an address or a wallet that OFAC doesn't like? How deep does it have to go to stop OFAC from regulating my chain and to protect myself as a validator or as a miner? Like, these are new questions that everyone's going to have to grapple with. Luckily, a lot of people back in the day, like early 2010s, like started looking at this stuff and came to some decisions. And there's some chains that are around like Zcash and Monero that have really grappled with these questions deeply. But now we have some new projects like Tornado Cash or some of these other DeFi applications like Uniswap that have been built in the last few years that are really on the forefront of this, and all those developers are feeling the burn from pushing forward with their novel decentralized finance products.